welcome to the Art of Franchise Marketing. Each episode takes a deep dive into the franchise space and explores how the biggest and best brands handle national branding, franchise development, employee recruitment, and localized marketing on a daily basis. This podcast is brought to you by NetCertive, a localized digital marketing partner for franchise networks. Let's talk shop with franchise executives to discuss what's working, what's not, and answers the question, what else can you be doing to excel at the art of franchise marketing?
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Franchise Marketing podcast. I'm your host, Erin Martin, and this episode's brought to you by NetCertive. Today, our guest is Heidi Morrissey, the president of Kitchen Tune-Up and Bath Tune-Up, two brands under the Home Franchise Concepts umbrella. Heidi, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So just to kick it off, can you tell us a little bit more about your role at Home Franchise Concepts with your two brands and what you do there?
You bet. I actually started in Kitchen Tune-Up in 2003. So my dad founded the company in 1988. I joined him in 2003 to help him grow the business and kind of help him with his training program. And so became president in 2017. And in 2020, we made the decision to sell the company to Home Franchise Concepts. And at that point, I had just launched Bath Tune-Up. And so as we transitioned into our new ownership, of course, I decided I wanted to stick around and help grow these two brands, lots of vision there. And yeah, I've been the president of both of these brands now with HFC since the end of 2020 and president of Kitchen Tips since 2017.
And that's such a cool, rich history and story to grow up. I know there's a lot of people in franchising that are second generation, but what did that look like for you growing up? And how have you learned and taken experience from that into what you do now?
My dad was always an entrepreneur, probably since I was about 6 years old. So he used to work with a company called Montgomery Ward. He decided, why am I giving all of my skill set to somebody else? Why not start my own business? And my dad absolutely knew nothing about the kitchen industry, but he knew everyone had a kitchen. And so he started a company called Cabinets Universal and started that in the 70s. And that just blossomed. He learned how to market and sell. And eventually in the 80s, needed some additional money and decided to start doing tune-ups on kitchens. And that became what he franchised later on. But when he actually became a franchisor, I was in college and so wasn't really paying that much attention. And when he had his cabinet company, like my brothers worked for him, but I always did my own thing. I never ever thought that we would align and do something together because it really just wasn't something that I felt confident in, as most women in the home service sector, right? Like it wasn't something that I had a lot of confidence that I would understand. And so when he brought me in, it was really training. I learned that the marketing really wasn't being done very well. So I had my own business for 11 years. So I knew how to do that grassroots marketing. And so really started out with no intention of leading the company, but just helping fill the gaps and plug the holes in the boat that were there. And so I was just doing a lot of different things, helping franchises. You either fall in love with the franchise system when you join it, or you decide it's not for you. And of course, after 22 years almost, I must have fallen in love.
Yeah, and it's so funny how sometimes you look back and then after experience and living in the industry and just getting, I think, older and wiser, you realize what a special thing that your parents have done. When you're younger, you don't have that appreciation at all.
Yeah, you don't even really know what they were doing, right? I knew what franchising was at a very bare level, really associated like most people to hotels or restaurants. Didn't really understand what he was out doing, but I have a lot of appreciation and respect for everything he did, the hustle, the grit he had. And a lot of that had to be carried forward when I decided to launch Bath Tune-Up because didn't have a huge budget when we were doing it. And we just had to be really gritty and do all of those things. And I tell our franchises a lot that I feel like I'm responsible for my P&L, I'm hiring, I'm doing the same things they're doing. I'm a little bit larger level.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what did that journey look like for you guys? Because that's absolutely like the gamut of growth from just starting your own company and brand to franchising to expanding, acquisition, like the whole thing. Way back when you first jumped in and started with marketing, like where was the marketing team and systems and tools at? And where did you dig in to grow those?
I hope you're okay hearing this. There was no marketing team.
Yep, that sounds about right.
Yep. And so I remember coming in, and really first thing I did was immerse myself in franchising, right? And I remember going to IFA, just really learning everything I could. And I went to all the marketing tracks and I went to the training tracks. And I remember saying to my dad, I think we're supposed to have these things, right? Like, we don't have these. And he was just like, oh, okay, what do we have to do to build it? And so we started hiring agencies and companies to help out because we really didn't have bodies in the office that were able to do a lot of this. I remember the first marketing training I watched, and our vice president at the time, he had all these ads he built in PowerPoint. And he was telling everyone that they could use these ads. Surprise, the newspapers and magazines were like, we can't take a PowerPoint for an ad. So there was some frustration. And I remember thinking, we've got to do all of these things properly. And of course, at the time, you think about those top 10, there really wasn't, there wasn't PPC. Our website was like 6 pages long. We had to build new websites. We had to really start to understand what was happening, but there was not really digital marketing in 2003 and 4 and 5 and 6. It was yellow pages, it was home shows, it was all of these other types of marketing that really was more print driven and things that were very, very much about the visual that we were creating. And so that was really critical, is to come back in and create that. So we hired a company in 2005 out of Chicago. We did a whole bunch of testing, consumer testing, to find out, like, what did people expect, want in the home remodeling world? And we realized the bar was pretty low. People really just wanted someone to call them back. And people just wanted someone
not
to
do a
show
shitty
up.
job.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. And we're thinking to ourselves, isn't that just common sense? We're in the Midwest. We're thinking this is common sense things. But that was the things that would wow the customer, was just taking care of them in a pretty normal fashion. But it wasn't expected in this industry, because this industry had let down a lot of consumers. And we realized that was the ticket for us to really elevate the brand, is if we can just take care of people, give them a better journey, really help them from the start, because they're pretty unsure about what they're going to change in their home. And we understood that from the start. Right? Like, people were starting to watch HGTV around then. They were starting to get some influence, but there still wasn't the amount of information that is available today, was not there at the beginning.
Yeah, which that's very probably spot on, given home services and the speed to lead now, with systems in place to be able to win that war. Right. So what does it look like today for you guys to be able to uphold that great customer service and speed to response?
Yeah, I think that's the cool thing about what technology is provided for all businesses, right? Is this ability to create a customer journey that can be automated, and we can still be personalized. Like, how can you be automated and personalized at the same time? That's what technology does for you. Mm-hmm. And so that is a part of it. And of course, we have to trust our partners, our franchise partners, that they're going to go out and do all of those best practices. And we track that. We have our franchises are getting scored after each sales call and after each review. And we have our NPS score that we're getting back, so that we're understanding how are we being perceived from the customer. And I think that the coolest thing is when you look at those scores, especially in this industry, you would be hard pressed to get even over 50. And we've been over 80 almost since we launched it. And so it's a very high score. It was a negative 100 to 100, right? So anything over 0 is considered awesome. And so to be in the 80s for the brands, I think we understand that the customer sentiment is very positive, right? It's very positive. And that gets everybody really excited to understand, like, how can I keep that score up? And a lot of our franchises have 100. They're at 100 for their score.
Yeah, which that is definitely not a norm. So right. That's impressive.
So just tracking that journey, making sure customers are feeling like it's different. And when I go and I read all the comments that come in, and I'm like, they're always still very similar to what I read 20 years ago, which we used to do it in cards, customer comment cards. That was always a big thing. They sent the comment cards in. Our franchises had to get in, I think 40% of their customers had to have a card sent into them. That was just part of our contract. So customer sentiment has always been critical. And the same thing they said 20 years ago, they showed up on time. They were so nice to my dog. I really enjoyed having it. It's never about the project. It's rarely about how did the kitchen look or how did the bath look. It was how were they treated? Critical.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, one thing that I've been chatting with a lot of marketers about is that customer experience, specifically how to use data for that kind of automation versus personalization piece you're talking about. And so then it sounds like you've got a good handle on tracking a lot of the customer sentiment and satisfaction. And how else do you guys go about better understanding your customer and then infusing that into all of your other programs, whether it's referral or cross-selling or whatever it may be?
Yeah, there's so many things, right? Like we have a great CRM. It's really more than a CRM. It is really the entire operating system. So
what do you guys
CRM,
use?
we're using ServiceMinder.
Okay,
and so
nice.
We've been using that since 2018. Prior to that, everything was much more Excel-based forms that people filled out.
Yeah.
But I will give my dad a lot of credit. From day one, he always tracked leads, marketing spend. He always tracked customers. So we have that data for the entire length of our organization, which a lot of people don't. So I can track year over year. I can look at a 5-year segment of the business. I know like when we have our best sales day or when we have our most leads each day. So a lot of the tracking, so it's coming in through the CRM, then it's actually being pushed into Domo. So Domo is what HFC is using as that place for us to store, right? Store all of this. And now I can go in on a very regular basis, and I do, looking at, okay, so where are our sales? Where are the sales at? We're not a point of sale type of company. Like we don't have a cash register. We don't know those things, but we do in the CRM see the sales, we see the leads. So we can tell if a day is a little bit down immediately. Okay, where are the leads at? Now our marketing team knows that they can call out. We may throw out something that they can do the next day to just get some excitement. Maybe it's a little video that they can put on social media. Maybe there's something we can do to make a difference, whereas prior to having that kind of speed to info, we had to wait. Like it was a month-long data hold, basically. Like we would get it and it's now what? That was last month. And you can still make some decisions based on it. You can still use some comparisons, but now you can change things in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of BI tools or analytics and intelligence in CRMs are one thing that marketers are getting a better handle of and looking at. And so what else is in that? What else for you guys is in Domo that you specifically look at too, in addition to sales?
So I'm looking at the marketing expense. I want to understand the CPL. I want to understand the ROAS. I want to understand how is that lead source producing for the franchise, right? Understanding that with a customer needing 5 to 7 perhaps impressions of a certain brand, that it may be not the only thing that helped them to get there. So I think that's always the big thing with franchising is if you don't have a attribution immediately, they want to cut that out. They're like, there's no attribution to it. And then they cut it out and they see a drop in the lead flow. So they can go on Domo and they can look at their Google Analytics. So let's say a magazine drops and they've got some ads in there. And you don't see any attribution in a month because nobody says I saw it in the magazine, right? Yeah. They fill out a form online or they go to the website or something. But if you see a spike at the drop time of traffic to the website, you can pretty much now say, obviously it made an impact.
Yep. Yeah. And that's the key, I think, with brand awareness all the time is people think about it as at the end of the day, it's lead generation. Like it is a critical piece in the upper funnel to get the lead to convert. And the last touch point of someone going directly to your website and booking or someone clicking on a paid ad and then booking an appointment or whatever it is, like that was influenced because of brand awareness. So we're getting closer to the magical, make those actual connections, but it's easy to lose sight of that when you're trying to.
You have to look at that booking rate too. Okay, out of all the leads that are flowing in, how many am I booking to an appointment? And then we have to look at our closing rate, right? We're looking at average ticket. All of that data put together can give you some business health numbers. And those KPIs are super critical. We're asking our franchises on a regular basis to really understand and own their numbers.
Yeah.
And once you own the numbers, because you can't manage what you don't measure, right? So once you own it, you don't normalize it, you try to push for a better number. right?
Yeah.
Because if we just normalize it and sit there, then our job as leaders of our companies, we need to be trying to figure out how I can make that a better number. How can I do that a little bit, get a little bit more effect from it? How can I take a lead and look at my referral rate? How do I look at my repeat customers? There's all of those types of things that you're constantly juggling. And as business owners that have a life that are doing other things locally, being able to give them a very easy tool that they can quickly get that snapshot, I think is super critical.
Yeah, that's good. And I'm curious for you guys what the kind of model for marketing that you guys either started with or transitioned to and landed on in terms of ownership between home office and the franchisees. I think one thing that's interesting that I've seen the trend shift towards a little bit more is a little more national ad funds and NAFs being used to handle more of the marketing because it can be done in a more centralized and, because we're marketers, like correct way, as opposed to peanut butter spreading. And then it does give you some flexibility to be able to do things like add in more brand awareness that's needed, as opposed to sometimes if the Z's have a limited budget nor investment, then you can't layer in those type of things like you could if you're working with a larger fund to play things around. So it's interesting to see all the mix and models that are out there in franchising and where brands land. So I'm curious what's worked for you guys or what you've seen in your experience.
Yeah, I think that is something that's continuing to evolve, right? Because we didn't even have national advertising until 2005. My dad had it written in his contract, but he had written that by a majority vote that they could enact it. And so when I wanted to start it quickly. My dad said, if you can get a majority vote, you go for it, right? So you put a committee together, you talk, you get a good story, and we got 98% of the owners that wanted to go forward. Since then, we have had a variety of NAF structures. We've had per month, per territory, and we're now at a percentage, right? So at 1%, which interestingly, the franchises are asking if it makes sense right now to up it. When do we hear that?
Wow.
You hear that, right?
I know. That's the first for me.
I know. So if you're under $1 million in sales, the goal here is you've got to get very focused on what you want to do. So is that 60, 70, 75% digital so that you're super focused so that you can put enough in that you're going to make a difference. Right? Because you got private equity kind of dumping money in the home service industry, in digital, like in different markets, and you got to be able to be a player. Now, once you start to grow, you need to diversify, right? So a lot of our franchises are going to start out, they've got a marketing toolkit. We have a 12-week plan where every week we're trying to work on different elements of the marketing part of their business. And some of this is going to be partnerships. So whether it's appliance stores, plumbers, electricians, flooring stores, anywhere that has a synergistic model, then we're going to try to work with them. We also are going to be at your BNIs and your chambers and things that are going to obviously start to do some networking, get that name out. So those things are critical, but as people grow, they may find themselves struggling to even spend their whole budget on digital, depending on the market they're in. So now you got to look at what else can you do? We're finding, interestingly, I always find how things come around, right? Home shows, again, are really great for us. They still are. And there was a slight time during COVID where I would say that they seemed like they weren't as impressive, but they're starting to come back strong. The other thing that's been really interesting is postcards. And postcards can be extremely expensive because you're trying to get that perfect avatar. You're looking at different neighborhoods, but everyone, once they start doing jobs, you understand like where is there more money, where are people not so budget conscious? And so you can start targeting those with these beautiful postcards. I would not have thought that in 2025, we'd be talking about postcards with all the digital options out there. And so we're also seeing a really good return when you start looking at HOAs. So you go into an HOA and you try to get a little bit of presence there. And as they have usually little magazines or newsletters you can get into, they're not a high cost, but you don't need a lot. You only need to get 1 or 2 homes with your yard signs and everything that you're doing. You're going to get more in that area. So it's interesting. Digital is always going to probably stay top of list. So if you look at what's our top lead generator? It's the website. But what drives traffic to the website? That is where it becomes interesting, right? Because your vehicle is driving traffic to the website. Your print ads are driving it. Your yard signs are driving it. So you can't just say, oh, okay, it's just the website. But the owners are seeing that from paid social, that the NAF is actually performing better than their local. That's where they're asking, hey, can we contribute more in our marketplace? So we got a conference coming up soon. We're going to have that discussion with our FAC, and then we'll have conversations with the franchises too about what makes sense.
Yeah. And that sounds like you've got some savvy franchisees then, or the right data to tell the story where they're seeing what's working and want more of it. Social is such a visual, strong, social proof medium. So I'm curious what for you guys on the social front specifically too has been working really well to drive that success.
Yeah, historically, Facebook does pretty well for us. Instagram is starting to get a little bit of secondary traction. I wouldn't say that it's working for everyone, but if I've got a franchise that has over 1,000 followers on Instagram, they're starting to see some better traction. I've got a couple on TikTok. There's a few out there, and we've done a few tests with NAF on TikTok also. Hard to find attribution right now on that level. It's probably maybe a little young, even though I'm on TikTok, and I mean, I would be the ideal client. So it's really interesting what we did in August is we did this kind of an overinvestment just to see if we could drive more leads, and even to see if maybe we were maxed out. Like, we needed to understand, was the consumer just fatigued? Are they spending their money somewhere else? Or is it that we were just underspending? And so we threw quite a bit of an additional budget in place for this test. And that is what has convinced the franchises, for the most part, that paid social with a higher budget actually produced a higher number of leads and interest. And once you get those leads in, now we're going to do email marketing to them, which is happening twice a month. And so now you've got these campaigns that are going out that are encouraging people. We always say we want to intensify their dissatisfaction. That's why we do a lot of drip campaigns, because it's like, if I already don't like it, I just want to make them not like it faster.
Yes.
They want to get that done, right? So if it's a 6-month cycle, I want to reduce it to 3 months.
Faster to know. And that's interesting about social too, because that's the other piece or like myth that I think needs to be debunked with it, with the media mix, is you can't just think of it as a lower funnel lead gen. Like in your guys' instance, you're working it as to capture and nurture with more tactics down the line. And similarly with paid social, you could retarget based off of location pages or site pages that they visit. So it has a little different, unique play in the mix than just Facebook lead forms or something.
I think that's that attribution. We talk high funnel, mid funnel, low funnel leads, and everybody would just love the low funnel leads ready to go. And we do too. But you need a mix, right? Like most businesses couldn't take 30 low funnel leads today and do them well, right? They just aren't set up that way. So you need to have them in different areas so that you've got some future leads, you've got some leads a month from now, and you've got some right now. You have to have a mix of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So then turning to bath tune-up, where did that idea come from and spawn from? How did you guys even get that off the ground? What was that process like?
I think we've done baths in our business really almost the entire time we've been in business, because then you start to update your kitchen. There's 2 rooms that wear out in your house, right? Your kitchen and your bath. So when we went through that with that marketing company in Chicago, we actually thought about whether or not we should change our name. We were testing out, should we be kitchen and bath tune-up? Should we be something different? And it was a resounding no. Everyone thought kitchen tune-up was the right name in the focus groups, and they felt like they would understand that they would also could get baths done. But what we found is that obviously the focus is going to lean in the kitchen side. It's your first name. And so as we were going through time, and we dropped one set of bath, which was we were doing bathtub liner inserts. We would just go over the top of bathrooms. We dropped that in about 2010, just due to lack of interest from the franchises. And I always told my dad one day I'd like to have a whole bunch of tune-up brands. I really can see us doing bath tune-up and many different areas of the home. We could just put the word tune-up behind it, because tune-up doesn't have to mean the original tune-up that we had. It could just be tuning up their lives, tuning up their homes. And my dad got a little risk adverse after the recession in 2008 and 9. And I would say I was talking about the bath tune-up, talking to different franchises about it. And finally, in 2019, I'd been president for a couple of years. I would meet with my parents. Once a year, we'd go through the financials. I would tell them my plan and where I was going to spend some additional money. And I told them I was ready to launch the brand, the bath tune-up brand. And they were like, oh man, you're working so much. Why do you want to do that? And I said, listen, I've had 2 baths remodeled. It was not a great experience. Like they kept sending me out, go find this for your flooring, go to this store and get your tile, go over. And I'm thinking to myself, do they think I'm a designer? Like I'm not a designer. I don't know if anything goes together. I'm just taking my little piece of tile with me to try to match it to and I thought this has to be done better. And I always had in my head this idea, I don't know if you know about Geranimals as a kid, there was like clothing that you would pick your elephant shirt and you could find your elephant pants. And then anything that was elephant, they all went together in your closet for those people that just didn't know how to. And I thought we could do that in the bath space. We'll curate these collections. And so if people are wanting to make a few selections, everything goes together. It's okay. They won't make a mistake. But they still get to be a part of the journey of selections without having to run to 5 stores.
Yeah, or too much analysis paralysis.
And people are always like, people that don't do something in their home, it's not because they went with somebody else. Most times they didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Because they got overwhelmed, right? They were just like, I'm fatigued. I can't make one more decision today.
I get overwhelmed talking about it. I'm not going to lie. Like I can imagine redoing things and I get a little stressed.
Yeah. So of course we went into this. We had the logo already created. We had some information. I told my franchises who were a little nervous, right? Because most of them did 1 or 2 things in the bath and they were wondering, what does this mean? And I said to them, listen, if you guys want the bath tune-up, I'll get you a special deal. We will give you guys first dibs at the business. Like I'm not going to sell it for a year until you guys have made your decision. So we thought that by March of 2020, we would have everything ready to go. March of 2020 took a turn. Yeah. And instead I didn't get all of the information I needed. So I needed to have my trademark done. That was supposed to take 4 weeks. It took until August. Of course, by that time we had come through like this COVID time. We had realized that our business was going to not just thrive, but just like explode during that time. I'm trying to manage that. And by August, when I had it, my dad had made the decision to sell the company. And so I was also now talking to private equity. I was talking to companies that wanted to come look at us. We actually did our very first training December of 2020. And the last day of 2020 is when we sold the company. So it was a lot. So when we were acquired, I said, hey, I've got this little brand here. I'm just trying to get it launched and I want to, are you guys going to bring this forward? And like, of course, we love this. This is great. Let's see what we can do. And they are much more investment minded than what my dad was at that time. My dad used to be investment minded. He wasn't any longer. So just knowing that I was going to be able to really launch this with investment focused partners was just super exciting. And so, so we're at about 54 locations now with Bath Tune-Up. And so that's really good because now if you think about 2021 is really our first full year of business.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And knowing that most franchise businesses never grow past 50, right? Only 20% grow over 50. So knowing that we hit that a couple of years ago when we were at like 51, like 2 years ago, that was really exciting for us. And of course, I do have a lot of co-branded. I have a lot of kitchen tune-up and bath tune-up, but I do now have just bath tune-up that are just come in standalone brands.
Yeah. That's a great story and so great. Home franchise concepts, I think also, I wouldn't say stumbled in, but they found a winner in that what you guys had. So great find by them. Looking back then on that journey, what advice would you give for marketers who are trying to launch a new brand? It sounds like trademark, you definitely learned some lessons on that one of how long it takes. Like what other tips would you give marketers?
I think the interesting thing, one thing that we didn't know is we really felt like the kitchen tune-up and bath tune-up client were going to be a lot more similar than they were. And that journey of uncovering that client, because kitchen tune-up did bath tune-up, bath clients, let's call them, we thought that would be a more similar client. It's not. And so there was some things that needed to split and change. So as much as people like you have the same last name, the brands have very different offerings. Bath Tune-Up has a much higher average ticket than Kitchen, which surprises everybody. And it's just due to the fact that Kitchen Tune-Up has some budget-friendly options that are much lower. We don't necessarily have that. Bath Tune-Up is much more like your dream bath, right? Like your spa-like bathroom. And so we had to shift and change a couple of our assumptions as we started, and you have to be okay doing that. And I think a lot of times when people are founders and you're starting a new brand, you are very intent on what your vision was, and you have to be a little flexible. with understanding that it could be something different than you thought, even if you've done research, which we've done, even if we were looking at everything and how we were going to position ourselves in the marketplace, all that stuff was done prior, but we still had to make some shifts and changes.
Yeah. So be able to adapt and learn
Yes.
as you go.
Yes.
A few more questions that I want to dig into is, so then managing the two brands, what does that look like from the marketing system side of things and how you approach the similarities and those differences that you're identifying, both like either people resourcing versus budget allocation and just your general strategy and approach? Where does it cross over versus have different workflows?
Yeah, there definitely are some savings, right? Because if let's say I had both brands, I can definitely do some co-branding. I can have a vehicle co-branded, I can have ads co-branded. So from that side for that journey, that's going to be helpful. What I did with the company is we do have some people that are only in each brand, like just some people that are only in bath tune-up, some people that are only in kitchen tune-up. But the bulk of the team actually supports both brands. And that gives us a lot of benefit because now you're taking that knowledge, that industry information that you have, that maybe I've got some homies with me. Our franchise calls homies because they're toonies. So I've got homies that have been with me now for almost 29 years, 30 years. I wouldn't want to lose that kind of historic knowledge. And I can bring that forward into a new brand and we can really not make any of the same mistakes. We can change things a little bit quicker. We can make those adaptations very quickly. But when you start looking at your budget, they have different budgets because they're different sizes. So kitchen tune-up has a larger NAF budget than bath tune-up does. So we're going to look at the strategies differently. But we can share things like when we go do video production, we can go to locations that have both brands and we can knock it out at the same time. And so it's going to save us money on NAF so that we don't have to have two different video companies trying to do two different things. So there's a lot of cost savings when you're running two brands that do have a similar, I guess, being in the home services, right? So we're both in the home, same time. I can really share that learning. We can take learnings from other home franchise brands too. We can see what's happening at Budget Blinds or Tailored Closet or Premier Garage because we all have similar kind of client bases. We all have very similar, but we have different businesses though, right? So there's some similarities and then there's those differences. We take those learnings, we talk about them, we bring them forward. I would say that with kitchen tune-up, when we do tests, we have more locations to test at. So we're going to get a broader piece of information back at us, right? Where bath tune-up is a little bit smaller. So now I may have less locations to test with. I'm going to still get data. I'm still going to get information that's good. It's just not going to be as broad.
And for you guys then, is your target buyer the same persona or do they differ slightly in terms of either household income or the kind of personality and behavior?
Yeah, when you're looking at this business, generally you're looking for people, it's females tend to be our clients. There's always there could be a spouse that is part of that buying decision, but it's usually the female that's leading the charge here. So it's usually over 50 and generally they have obviously disposable income. So micro demographic is going to be your millennials. You're going to definitely see that they have watched their parents work on weekends, DIY, everything, and they're not going to do that. They're going to spend some time. Now they tend to spend a little bit less. Now, what we're seeing is that the bath market is a little broader. I would say the bath market, if I wouldn't just be targeting females 50 and older, I would probably go down to 40 and older for the bath because a lot of people, especially new home buyers, they're coming into a space and it just is not inviting. It's not something that they want to live with. And I would say that today's buyer is more influenced by HGTV. They're looking at things and saying, I don't need for it to wear out or be moldy or be falling apart. I can change it because it's just not my style. And that's a huge benefit for us. So that part's the same. Disposable income is very important in this particular industry. It's not going to be for somebody that if you have an emergent situation, you have to fix it, like a roof leaking or something. That's just anybody that owns a home. But for us, it's really people that are going to have a little bit of disposable income first. And so if you are looking at a market, we're going to be looking at households that are at or above state averages. You're going to be looking at incomes. So that's how we develop our territories, to go around that demographic, to give people the best opportunity. Now, along with the residential, we have commercial, right? You've got assisted living, you've got timeshares, you've got apartments. That's a little bit different market. I tell people that's your gravy. And so depending on that person buying the business, if they have that comfort level, they've got that right person that's going to go out there and do those things. That can be another great avenue to start growing your business, is to go into those areas. Airbnbs, all that. Yeah.
Diversification is one thing we've talked about a ton in terms of, does it expand and almost go a mile wide and inch deep when you expand, or is it still a great addition to be able to diversify? For you guys, it sounds like that's been beneficial to offer. Is it something that support for every franchisee, or is it only specific areas that you see opportunities? Like, how do you balance those two dichotomies?
Yeah, I don't know that it's for everyone, because commercial sales and residential sales are very different. One feels more cold calling, one is very warm and inviting. So you have to have that right personality that is okay getting rejected. The commercial side and looking for that right person. So I would say, when you look historically at the business, who does more commercial than residential, it's probably on the coast, right? If you go to Myrtle Beach, or if you go anywhere where there's going to be more timeshares, more condos, things like that, and there's going to be a lot of use, those are probably where you're going to see more of that commercial business. And then when you start going into proper cities, if you're going to Chicago proper, Minneapolis, you're going to see more in those areas also, just because that is what's in the city. You're a very different type of client. In New York, we've got somebody, and they do a lot more apartments and things than anybody else, but that's not really commercial in New York, because you buy your apartment, right? It's still a residential, it's just in a very different type of building. So now you have to deal with elevators and different things. But yeah, I don't know if I would tell people that they need to focus primarily on the residential. It's not as fickle. This commercial can be great one day, and one day it can be shut off. So you definitely want to balance that out a little bit. But even like with the kitchen tune-up part, when we're restoring wood, that's great in churches and buildings and offices, anywhere there's woodwork, right? There's a need for this. It doesn't take much for that woodwork to need to be tuned up. But we have that, I would say we have about 20% of our franchises that do 15 to 20% in commercial. And so hasn't changed much over the years. That's about what it's been. And so I think that's just that it's that person that makes that decision to add that. But I don't think as long as it doesn't take away from your residential, right? Like, it's almost like you have two divisions in your company. That you're focused on. And so it's not like you're taking people out of your residential side and putting them over into your commercial side. You're actually creating two divisions.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And before we head out, I know you do a ton of speaking and podcasting. You're well-versed in the industry and space. And so I'm curious if there's any other high-level trends or advice you give to marketers right now in terms of other things that you guys see working really well for yourself, trends that you think other marketers need to absolutely be paying attention to, any of those tips for the rest of us.
I think everyone's probably talking a lot about AI and how you can utilize that. And interestingly, Home Franchise Concepts, they have a contest every year where you can come up with innovations and technology. And a year or two ago, a couple of the IT people came up with this really amazing tool that we're going to be launching in just a couple of weeks. And basically, it's tied into local blog posting. Because we know that as a franchise, one of our challenges with blogs is I can't just give everybody a blog. And now all of a sudden it's on 300 sites and Google says, hey, these are all the same. What's going on? And we know franchises are just really busy. And so what this does is it ties AI into the back end of their blog, where they can just pick a couple of keywords and it produces for them a blog that they can then upload onto the site. And so I think and so when we're looking at like SEO, which I know is changing all the time, but we also know that when we have some new content, that how critical new content is. And now I can share that content in emails, I can share it on Facebook or social or wherever I'm at. And so that is going to be released here in just a couple of weeks to our franchises. And they've tested it enough to understand that even if I pick, so you and I let's say we're both franchises, and you pick the same two keywords that I pick to write one, we'll get different blogs.
Interesting. So it's taking into account actual localization market dynamics to tailor it.
Yes, wasn't that smart? They did it so smart. And so I loved when I heard about it, I thought, oh, how long is it going to be until we get that? So I think being really focused on how do we use AI to really drive business and not just we don't want it to create mediocrity. I think you have to watch, right? I think teaching people how to prompt AI is going to be one of our critical functions as we keep going.
Yeah, and that's a very cool example. It reminds me of a modern day hackathon, like the old school hackathons where you just close yourself in an office for 24 hours and see what you can produce with a team without sleeping, which is a horrible idea. But what you guys did is like the evolution of that, which is a great way to go about getting creative and playing with what's possible with AI. Because I think that's also the piece that's overwhelming sometimes with all the different tools and things that are going on. It's okay, you got to start with the problem and then get creative with what's out there to have the solution. However,
cool stuff,
efficiency,
right?
Content production, whatever it is. I love that example. I haven't heard anything like that in terms of just letting different teams play with ways to tackle things. Like that's a great way to crowdsource getting creative.
The parent company of Home Franchise Concepts, JM and Enterprises, they are very innovative focused, right? They always so they challenge everyone every year to come up with ideas. And so that's just an annual event and they vote on them and they get a lot of attention. It's really cool. And I would also tell marketers today, as the consumer continues to get fatigued by different types of marketing. Back in the early aughts, that was when people were fatigued by anything in the mail because we were getting so much mail. People were fatigued. People are starting to get a little fatigued on digital marketing. So you need to have an additional strategy along with it to feed it, because as people become more fatigued, email marketing kind of happened too. Like email was just like, it was too much. People were getting too many. Let's get these moved over. So you have to keep looking at some of those grassroots things, getting those reviews, focusing on things locally, depending on what your industry is at. There are things that worked well years ago that could come back around and work well again. And so we can't get our heads in the sand and be like, we should all just figure out how to do digital only. We're going to lose sight of some of that fatigue that's happening.
Yeah, and that's such a good tip about you can't just rule out what's been done in the past thinking that it's old and dusty and we're over it. QR codes and bell bottoms are back, people. So
they are.
It all comes back around.
It all does. And you might, I don't think Yellow Pages will, but
I hope not.
I do think that there are some strategies that we have dismissed out of hand just because we're like, that was done 20, 30 years ago and we want the new shiny piece of marketing. And I think that is important to stay on top of those things and understand how to utilize them. But there are things that are supportive in the local environment, especially from a franchise side. You've got to be focused as a local business also. But critical.
Yep. Oh my gosh, Heidi, I feel like we could talk for another hour. This is so good. Loved our conversation. Thanks so much for coming on today. And thanks for everyone who listened in to another episode of The Art of Franchise Marketing.
Thanks for listening to The Art of Franchise Marketing. This show is brought to you by NetCertive. We help franchise brands and multi-location businesses run localized digital marketing at scale. To learn more, visit netcertive.com.